My name is Hannah, and I was raised in what you might call a typical middle-class family. My dad worked as a senior project manager at a construction company, and my mum stayed home to take care of my younger sister Amber and me. We lived in a modest house on the outskirts of Cleveland. Nothing fancy, but it was home. Mum would always remind me how lucky we were, how we had everything we needed. Amber, well, she was the apple of everyone's eye. She had a way of winning everyone over, and she could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. I always felt like I was the sensible one, the responsible one, trying to keep things together in a family that, despite all appearances, was a bit fractured beneath the surface. Dad was the backbone of our family. He worked long hours, sometimes taking on extra projects to make sure we were secure. I remember him telling me often, especially when I started college, "Hannah, sweetheart, you don't need to work while you're in school. I make enough to support us all. Focus on your studies." But I didn't want to sit back. Even though I had a full scholarship, I wanted to make my own money, to stand on my own 2 feet. So I took a part-time job at Wilson's department store, stocking shelves on evenings and weekends. It was hard work, but it was mine. It felt good to be independent, even if it meant sacrificing time I could have spent with friends or studying. Everything was normal, or at least it felt normal, until one Tuesday in March, during my sophomore year. I remember the fluorescent lights of the store blaring above me as I folded clothes in the back. My phone buzzed in my pocket. At first I thought it was just another text from Amber, probably asking me to pick her up or complaining about some trivial thing. But when I saw my mum's name on the screen, my heart skipped a beat. Hannah. Her voice was barely a whisper, shaky, like she was struggling to keep it together. "Your father, he had a heart attack at work. They couldn't save him." The words felt like a punch to the gut. Everything around me seemed to fade. The overhead pop music, the bright lights, the chatter of other customers. I remember sliding down against a shelf, my knees giving out beneath me. I couldn't breathe. My dad, the one person who had always been there, the person who had made sure we were okay, was gone. Just like that. The funeral was a blur. Mum put on a brave face, telling me, "Don't worry about money, Hannah. Your father left us enough to last a few years. Focus on your studies." I wanted to believe her. Dad had always been responsible with money. He talked about his life insurance policy and his savings, like it was something that would keep us safe. But I had no idea how wrong I was. That spring, I threw myself into my work and studies, hoping that if I kept busy enough, I wouldn't have to think about how our lives were falling apart. But as the months passed, I started noticing things. Little things. Mum was shopping more than usual. Amber was spending more time out with her friends, showing off new clothes, acting like nothing had changed. I didn't think much of it at first. People grieve in strange ways, right? But then came the phone call, the one that shattered whatever was left of our normal. "Hannah, you need to come home this weekend. We need to talk." My mum's voice was tight, her words heavy with something I couldn't quite place. I drove home that weekend with a knot in my stomach. When I walked through the door, the first thing I noticed was the new furniture in the living room. Dad's old armchair, the one he spent hours in, reading the paper or watching his favourite shows, was gone. Mom and Amber were sitting on the new couch, their faces tight, avoiding my gaze. I dropped my bag by the door. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling. Something in the air told me this wasn't going to be good. Mom took a deep breath, looking up at me. "Hannah, sweetie, there's something I need to tell you. The money, it's gone. All of it." I felt the world tilt beneath me. "What do you mean gone? Dad left us enough for years. How could it all be gone in less than a year?" She started to explain, her voice defensive, almost proud, as if listing off accomplishments instead of mistakes. "Well, Amber needed a prom dress. She only gets one prom, after all. And then after graduation, she went to Mexico with her friends. A 2-week trip, and then there was your birthday party. The best one of the year." I felt my stomach churn. "Mexico? With Dad's life insurance money?" I interrupted, my voice rising. Amber jumped in, as if a vacation was as necessary as breathing. "We just needed to get away, Hannah. You don't understand." My head was spinning. "You spent Dad's hard-earned money on a vacation." Mom placed a hand over her chest, like she was about to faint. "Hannah, honey, we needed to live a little. We were so sad about your father. Life's short, and we needed something to take our minds off things." I stared at them, disbelief rising in me like a tidal wave. How could they not see what they'd done? How could they be so out of touch with reality? "Take your mind off things by blowing through Dad's life savings," I almost whispered, the weight of the betrayal sinking in. "Mom, do you even understand the magnitude of what you've done?" But they didn't. They couldn't. And suddenly, it was clear to me that I was the only one left who could hold everything together. As I stood there, staring at my mother and Amber, the weight of it all hit me like a ton of bricks. I could barely comprehend what they were saying. It was as if they were living in some alternate reality where money didn't matter, where consequences didn't exist. And the worst part? They didn't seem the least bit sorry. Amber, with her fresh tan from Mexico, shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Mom. "I mean, yeah, things got tight," she said, her voice softening slightly. But it's not like we didn't need a break. We've been through a lot, you know. Losing Dad, everything. It's been hard. Hard? I repeated, almost laughing, though there was no humor in my voice. It's been hard for you because you didn't get a prom dress or a vacation. What about the roof over our heads? What about the future Dad worked so hard to secure for us? My voice was rising and I couldn't stop it. Do you think he'd be okay with you blowing all of that money? Do you think he'd want this? His whole life's work, gone in less than a year. Mom shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flickering to Ember, then back to me. I know it looks bad, sweetheart, but we needed to live a little, just for a while. We were grieving. And you know, you've been so focused on school and work, you didn't even notice how hard it's been for us. She bit her lip, and I could see the tension in her face. I could feel my blood start to boil. You're right. I didn't notice. I didn't notice because I was too busy picking up the slack for both of you. I'm the one who's been working 2 jobs while you've been out shopping, eating at fancy restaurants, and throwing parties. You didn't even ask me how I was doing. You didn't even try to help. That's not fair, Amber interjected, her voice rising, just like it always did when she felt cornered. You never asked for our help either. You just shut us out, like you're the only one who's had it rough. I blinked at her, incredulous. I didn't ask for help. Amber, you've never worked a day in your life, and you're acting like I'm the problem. Enough, both of you, Mom snapped, her voice trembling with frustration. This isn't the time for arguing. She placed a hand on her chest again, and I couldn't help but notice how dramatically she was acting. I can't take the stress, Hannah. I really can't. Your father's gone. I'm just trying to keep things together here. I felt my fists clench at my sides. You're not keeping things together, Mom. You're falling apart. And so is everything else. The words slipped out before I could stop them, but they were true. The house was falling apart, the bills were piling up, and my entire world was crumbling, while they continued to live in some fantasy where nothing mattered but their own comfort. Mom's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, she looked at me with something resembling anger. You have no idea what it's like to be in my shoes, Hannah. You don't understand what I'm going through. She threw up her hands in exasperation. Why don't you try and help us out a little? You're the one with the job, aren't you? Maybe you should be the one to support us. I was stunned into silence, a cold rush of shock flooding through me. Support them? After everything? My brain struggled to process the audacity of it all. I'm already supporting us, I said through gritted teeth, barely holding it together. I've been supporting us since Dad died. I've been working every day, trying to make up for the mess you two have made. Amber crossed her arms, rolling her eyes. Well, maybe if you weren't so busy being the martyr all the time, you'd actually notice that we're trying to live our lives too. My head felt like it was spinning. Live your life, I repeated, my voice shaking with frustration. You're both living in a bubble, pretending everything is fine. You're not just spending money, you're destroying everything Dad built for us. You have no idea what's at stake here. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel my chest tightening, and I fought to keep my composure. But it was impossible. I had given everything. I had sacrificed my time, my energy, my sense of peace. And for what? So they could live in denial? Why don't you just admit it? I said quietly, my voice trembling. You don't want to face the consequences. You don't want to deal with the reality of what's happening. Mum's expression faltered, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe fear, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. You're being dramatic, Hannah, she said, her tone cutting, as if dismissing me entirely. Amber nodded. Yeah, you always do this. You act like you're the only one who cares. I couldn't hold it back anymore. I'm done. I can't keep doing this. With that, I turned on my heel and walked out of the living room, trying to breathe through the knot that had formed in my throat. I didn't know what else to say. There was nothing left to say. As I got in my car and drove away from the house, the reality of the situation began to hit me. I was alone in this. I had to be. I had to carry the weight of everything on my own, because no one else seemed to care. And somehow, deep down, I knew that I would have to fight for everything now. My future, my stability, my sanity. But it felt like I was already losing the battle. The weight of everything was suffocating. I'd spent the past few months, hell, the past year, sacrificing every ounce of myself for a family that didn't seem to care. The late nights at SuperValue, the double shifts, the endless days trying to piece together some semblance of normalcy in a house that was crumbling both physically and emotionally. And for what? To watch my mother and sister spend money they didn't have, pretend like they were in control when they were doing nothing but destroying everything Dad had worked for. I knew I couldn't do it anymore. I was drowning, and no one was throwing me a life raft. It all came to a head one evening when I came home from a 15-hour shift, barely able to keep my eyes open. I had just enough energy to make a cup of coffee and sit at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of bills that seemed to grow exponentially each month. But then I heard it, Amber's voice, loud and insistent from the living room. Mom, it's not enough. It's just not enough. I'm telling you, we need a bigger house. If we want to keep up with everyone else, we need to show we've got money too. I froze, I couldn't believe my ears. A bigger house? After everything? After Dad's house was barely holding together, and they'd spent every penny he left us like it was Monopoly money. How could she even say that? I stood up, my hands shaking, and walked toward the living room. My pulse was racing, a mix of fury and disbelief flooding my veins. When I stepped into the doorway, I saw Amber sitting there on the couch, flipping through some glossy real estate magazine like it was no big deal. Mum was sitting beside her, nodding like it was the most reasonable idea in the world. "Are you out of your mind?" I spat, my voice trembling with rage. "A bigger house? With what money, Amber? You think we can just snap our fingers and make everything better?" Mum shot up from the couch, her face flushed. "Hannah, you need to calm down. This is what we need, okay? We can't keep living like this, in a house that's falling apart. We need to live within our means," I interrupted, my voice cracking with the frustration I had been holding back for so long. "But no one here seems to get that. You're talking about getting a bigger house like it's just another shopping trip, but what you're really doing is digging us deeper into a hole we can't climb out of." Mum's face twisted with anger. "You don't get it, do you? We're just trying to make things better for ourselves. You're so focused on the bills and the stress that you can't see that we need to live." "Live," I repeated, my voice rising. "You're living in a fantasy. You've spent every last cent of the money Dad left us, and now you want more. You've put us in a position where I'm the only one who's working, the only one who's sacrificing, and you're asking for more." Amber's eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms, her tone defensive. "Don't act like you're the only one who cares, Hannah. You've been working non-stop, but you haven't been the one living in this house, dealing with Mom. You don't know how hard it's been for her." "Hard?" I laughed bitterly. "How hard has it been for her, Amber? Has she been out looking for a job? No. She's been spending her days planning vacations, throwing parties, buying things we can't afford, and dragging you along for the ride. I'm the one who's been carrying this family on my back while you two sit around, acting like life is a game." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. I could hear the pounding of my own heart in my ears as I took in what I'd just said. I could feel the anger building, swelling inside me until I couldn't contain it any longer. And then, it happened. It wasn't a fight or a loud confrontation. It was a moment of cold, hard clarity. "You know what?" I said, my voice eerily calm now. "I've had enough. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep watching you two destroy everything I've been working for, everything Dad worked for. I'm done." Mom's eyes widened, her voice trembling as she stepped toward me. "Hannah, please, don't do this. We can fix this. We just need time. You've been so angry, but it's just because we're all still grieving. We can work things out, please." "No," I said, my voice breaking with finality. "I'm done. I'm done being the one who holds this family together. I've given up enough of my life, and I'm not going to lose any more." I turned to walk out of the room, but Mom called after me, her voice desperate. "Hannah, we need you. You're the only one who can help us." I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The pain in my chest was overwhelming, but it was overshadowed by a fierce determination, a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. I grabbed my keys off the counter, slamming the door behind me as I stepped out into the night. The cool air hit my face, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. I wasn't going to be their caretaker anymore. I wasn't going to sacrifice my future for people who didn't value it. I was leaving. For good. I didn't know what the next step would be, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally move forward. The chains were broken, and whatever happened next, I would face it on my terms. The days after I left were a blur of anger, guilt, and relief. I had never expected my family to react with understanding, but the weight of their condemnation hit harder than I anticipated. They tried everything to get me back. Calls, texts, emails, each one more desperate than the last. But I refused to respond. I needed space, and I couldn't let them drag me back into the chaos I had spent so long trying to escape. It wasn't long before they showed up at my door. My mum and Amber, looking like they'd been crying for days, stood there, their faces a mix of anger and confusion. "Hannah, open the door," my mum's voice crackled from the other side. "Please, we need to talk. This isn't how we fix things." I stood there, my heart racing, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I was tempted to open it, to let them in, to try to make it right. But then I remembered how they'd manipulated me for so long, how they had drained every ounce of energy from me, and never once stopped to consider what I needed. The guilt that gnawed at my insides felt like a lead weight, but I couldn't let it control me anymore. "No," I called back, my voice firm. "We've said everything we need to say. We're your family, Hannah." Amber's voice cracked, her words filled with hurt. "You can't just walk away from us. You don't get to cut us off like this. We're all grieving. Don't you understand that?" Her words stung, but they weren't enough to make me give in. "You don't get it, Amber. You've been living in a fantasy world while I've been picking up the pieces. I'm not your personal caretaker anymore. I'm done." There was silence on the other side of the door. I could hear them shift, their breaths heavy with frustration. Then my mum spoke again, her voice softer, but no less desperate. "Hannah, please, we were wrong. We know we messed up. We've learned our lesson. I could almost picture the look of vulnerability on her face, the way she always used guilt to manipulate me into feeling responsible for everything. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. "No," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and relief. "You haven't learned anything. You've just been playing the victim. It's not my responsibility to fix you anymore. And it's time you learned that." I could feel my heart pounding as I spoke. It was a line I had crossed, and I didn't know if I'd be able to come back from it. But as the words left my mouth, something inside me felt lighter. I wasn't going to carry this burden any longer. I wasn't going to let their mistakes ruin my life. There was a pause, and then Amber's voice rose with fury. "You're selfish, you know that. You're just like Dad, always running away when things get hard. You think you're better than us, don't you?" I closed my eyes, her words cutting through me, but I didn't let them break me. I wasn't the one who'd been living in denial. I wasn't the one who had squandered everything my father had worked for. "I'm not better than you," I replied quietly, finally letting the door close between us. "I'm just done being the one who sacrifices everything." The sound of their footsteps echoed down the hallway, and I was left standing in the quiet of my apartment, the weight of what I'd just done settling over me like a blanket. I felt torn. Part of me wanted to go after them, to try and fix things, to be the good daughter I'd always been. But another part of me, the part that had been suffocating under their pressure for years, felt free. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. I spent my time focusing on my work at the new store, determined to prove to myself that I could survive on my own. I called Rachel and told her what had happened. She didn't ask questions, just offered her support. "You're stronger than you think, Hannah," she said, and for the first time in ages, I believed her. I started making plans for the future. I applied for a better position at the store, one that would allow me to save more and finally start rebuilding my life. I also started researching ways to pay for school again, planning to take a few courses at night, even if it was just a few credits at a time. Still, the guilt lingered. I hadn't seen or spoken to Mom or Amber since that night. It felt strange, knowing they were out there, probably just a few blocks away, still trying to piece together their lives while I was moving on. I wasn't ready to forgive them, not yet, but a part of me wondered if I ever would. The wounds were too deep, the betrayal too raw. They had to change first. They had to show me that they were willing to be responsible, to step up and own their mistakes. I didn't know if they would, but I wasn't going to wait around for them anymore. I had my own life to build, and this time, I wasn't going to let anyone tear it down. I walked into work one morning, head held high, and felt the weight of the past year lift off my shoulders. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was finally taking control of my future, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like I was walking towards something worth fighting for. A few months had passed since I walked away, and slowly but surely, I began to piece my life back together. The relief I felt was palpable, a weight lifting off my chest every day. I woke up and didn't have to worry about my mother or Amber showing up at my door, demanding things I couldn't give. I had started to feel like myself again, something I hadn't truly experienced in years. My new apartment felt like a fresh start, just the right amount of space to breathe and think. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine. The faint smell of fresh paint still lingered in the corners of the living room, and I had begun to fill the shelves with books, plants, and little trinkets that made it feel like home. It was the first time in a long while I had allowed myself to enjoy the simple act of setting up my own space, free from the burden of anyone else's expectations. At work, things were looking up. Mr. Thompson had been supportive from the start, recognizing my work ethic and offering me a promotion to an administrator role. It was a big step, and for the first time in a long time, I could see the future I'd been working towards slowly taking shape. My paycheck wasn't huge, but it was mine, and it gave me the independence I had craved for so long. Even though my family had tried to reach out over the months, text messages, occasional emails, I didn't feel the need to respond. I wasn't angry anymore, but the wounds were too fresh to heal so quickly. I couldn't go back to a relationship where my boundaries were constantly being pushed. I had learned that, no matter how much you love people, you can't let them walk all over you. My father had taught me that, without even realizing it, by working so hard to protect us, by showing me that sacrifice could only go so far before it broke you. The hardest part was still missing Dad. I would find myself standing in the living room, glancing at the picture of him and me at my high school graduation, and it would hit me all over again that he wasn't coming back. I had learned how to live without him, but I wasn't sure I was ready to stop missing him. Yet as time passed, I realized that his love and lessons were still with me. I could almost hear his voice when I doubted myself. "You've got this, kiddo. Just keep moving forward." The turning point came when I found myself planning my wedding, something I had pushed aside for so long. After everything that had happened with my family, I had almost convinced myself that the idea of a wedding was too much. I didn't want to have a big event, didn't want to deal with the drama, but Jake, my fiancé, had been patient and loving, encouraging me to make this day ours, something that reflected who we were, not who my family thought we should be. It was a small, intimate ceremony, just a few close friends, and a handful of people who truly supported us. I spent months planning, From finding the perfect venue, to choosing the flowers and the music. I wanted every detail to be meaningful. When the day came, the sky was clear, the sun warm, and everything felt right. I walked down the aisle, my heart full of excitement and joy, not because I was fixing anything, but because I was finally choosing what made me happy, and not just what everyone else expected. The best part was having the freedom to enjoy the day without any stress or guilt. As I exchanged vows with Jake, promising to build a future together, I realized that I had learned the most important lesson of all. I was enough. I didn't need anyone's approval to move forward. I didn't need to fix anyone else's mistakes or carry their burdens. I was allowed to be happy, to live my life on my terms. Months later, I heard from Rachel, who had become a close friend since I'd moved out. "Hannah," she said one evening, "I think your mum and Amber are finally starting to realize what they've done. They've been talking about how much they miss you." I didn't know how to feel about it. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, but another part felt at peace with the way things were. They hadn't changed. At least, not yet. But that didn't mean I had to keep waiting for them to. I had learned to take control of my life, and I wasn't going to stop now. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I wasn't trying to escape the weight of my family's expectations, or trying to fix a broken situation. I was simply moving forward, toward a future I had built for myself. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift of all. The family I had once tried so hard to please could no longer define me. I had found my voice, my independence, and my own path. As the years passed, I remained open to the possibility of healing with my family. But for now, I was content. I had everything I needed in the life I was creating, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone take that away. Story 2. It's funny how you can grow up with people, share meals, holidays, a whole childhood, and still feel like they don't really see you. I always knew my parents favored Liam and Sarah, but I never thought they'd actually cut me off. Like, who disowns their own kid just because she wants to stay in college? But here we are. I'm in my second year at State, working my ass off. It's not some fancy Ivy League like Liam got into, but it's a good school, and I was proud to be there. Things were going okay, you know. Passing my classes, made a few friends. Then second semester hit and everything went sideways. It was a Saturday, and I was holed up in my room, catching up on schoolwork and binging Netflix. My parents called me downstairs for a family meeting. I thought, maybe they're finally going to ask about school, show some interest in my life. Yeah, right. I sat down, and my dad started talking in that lawyer voice of his. All reasonable and calm, but you can tell he's just manipulating the conversation. "Maya, we've been thinking about your future," he said. "We want to talk to you about something important." I thought, okay, maybe they have some advice about internships or something. Nope. "We've decided it would be best for you to take a break from college," he said. My brain froze. "Take a break?" I asked. My mum jumped in, all fake sympathy. "You've been doing okay, honey, but we think it's time you start contributing more to the family. Liam's starting law school soon, and we need to make sure Sarah's future is secure too." That's when it hit me. They wanted me to quit school, get a job, and help pay for Liam's law school and Sarah's college fund. No joke. My own parents were asking me to give up my education, something I busted my ass for, so they could support my siblings. I was stunned. "Are you serious?" I asked. My dad, still in that damn lawyer voice, said, "This is a practical solution, Maya. College hasn't been working out as well for you as we hoped. We think it's better if you start working full-time and contribute to the household. You can always go back to school later, go back later, like it's that easy." I tried to explain that I was doing fine, that I had plans, but they weren't listening. My mum, the queen of passive-aggressive insults, said, "Not everyone is cut out for higher education, Maya. There's no shame in honest work." I lost it. "So you want me to drop out so you can pay for Liam and Sarah?" I asked, my voice cracking. "What about my future? Do I not matter at all?" My dad sighed like I was a huge disappointment. My mum just shook her head. "We've given you plenty of chances, Maya," my dad said. "You've never been as focused as your siblings. We're just being realistic about where you fit in this family." That hit hard. It wasn't just about the money or school. It was about how they'd always seen me, like I was some kind of afterthought, a backup plan if Liam or Sarah didn't pan out. And in that moment, I realized that no matter what I did, I was never going to be good enough for them. So I did something I never thought I'd have the guts to do. I stood up, looked them dead in the eyes and said, "I'm not dropping out. If you're done with me, fine. I'll figure it out on my own." The silence after I said those words was deafening. My mum looked like I'd slapped her, and my dad, well, he just looked pissed. I think they honestly thought I'd cave, that I'd just nod and agree to their insane plan. But not this time. I was done being their backup plan. After that, things got even weirder. My dad just stared at me, and then my mum, of course, started crying. "We're doing this for you, Maya," she sobbed. "We just want what's best for the family." But all I could think was, how is this for me? They wanted to sacrifice my future to make sure Liam and Sarah had theirs all set up. I was done with their guilt trips and their favoritism, so I told them flat out, I'm not quitting school. If that's what you want from me, I'll just leave. I expected yelling, maybe a fight, but my mum just kept crying, and my dad muttered something about me regretting this decision. They didn't try to stop me. It was like they didn't even care if I left or stayed. I went upstairs and grabbed my old suitcase, the one we used to take on family vacations. It felt strange pulling it out, like I was packing for a trip, but this time, I wasn't sure when or if I'd be coming back. I threw in some clothes, essentials, my laptop, a few notebooks, and my sketchbook. Art's always been my escape, and I figured I'd need it now more than ever. As I was packing, I could hear my parents downstairs. My mum was still crying, and my dad was pacing, talking to her like I wasn't even there. He kept saying things like, she'll come to her senses, and she's always been difficult. That word, difficult, made my blood boil. It was like they didn't even see me as a person, just a problem to be fixed. I finished packing, grabbed my suitcase, and walked downstairs. They were still in the living room, acting like I wasn't even there. My mum had stopped crying and was just staring blankly at the wall, while my dad was scrolling through his phone. I stood there for a second, waiting for one of them to say something, to try and stop me, but they didn't. They didn't even look up. So I grabbed my suitcase, opened the front door and walked out. The door clicked shut behind me, and that was it. I was gone. I didn't have a plan, didn't even know where I was going. I just started walking. My heart was racing, and I could feel the weight of everything hitting me all at once. I was officially on my own. No family, no home, just me and my suitcase. I must have walked for miles before I realized I had nowhere to go. I pulled out my phone and texted my friend Sarah. We weren't super close, but she'd always been there when I needed someone to talk to. I told her what happened, and within minutes she texted back, come crash at my place. We'll figure it out. Relief washed over me. At least I had somewhere to go for the night. I grabbed an Uber to Sarah's apartment, and when I got there, she hugged me like I was a lost puppy. She didn't even ask for details right away, just let me dump my stuff in her spare room and collapse on the couch. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head. But the longer I stayed at Sarah's, the clearer things became. It sucked to leave home like that, but it was also the first time in forever that I felt in control of my own life. No more bending over backward to please my parents. No more trying to fit into their mold. I could actually live for myself. I spent the next week figuring things out. I called my academic advisor, explained the situation, and she was amazing. She helped me apply for more financial aid, and even got me into on-campus housing. I was going to be okay. It was weirdly freeing to realize that I didn't need my parents' approval anymore. I was doing this on my own. One of the hardest parts, though, was when my parents texted me. It wasn't an apology, not even close. It was more like guilt-tripping, saying things like, we hope you're okay, and you should come home and we can talk. Yeah, right. They didn't care if I was okay. They just didn't want to look bad. I ignored the texts and focused on getting my life back together. I also reached out to my Aunt Sarah, my mum's sister. She's the black sheep of the family, an artist who never really fit in with my parents' perfect vision of what success looks like. When I told her what happened, she was furious. They did what? She yelled over the phone. She offered to help me out financially until I could get back on my feet, and even said I could stay with her during breaks if I needed to. By the end of that week, I'd moved into my dorm, and I was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, I'd be okay. I was scared as hell, don't get me wrong, but there was also this weird sense of freedom. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living under my parents' shadow. I could finally breathe. Dorm life was strange at first. I'd go to class, come back to my tiny room, and it would be quiet. No yelling, no guilt trips, just silence. It was a weird feeling, but I was getting used to it. I started making friends, and my part-time job at the library was actually kind of nice. Quiet, lots of time to think. Then, out of nowhere, I got a text from Liam, the golden boy. I hadn't heard from him since I left, and honestly, I wasn't expecting to. I figured he'd side with my parents, pretend nothing was wrong, so when I saw his name pop up on my phone, I almost didn't respond. But curiosity got the best of me. The message was simple. Can we meet up? I want to talk. No explanation, no apology, just that. I debated ignoring it, but part of me needed to hear what he had to say. We met at a coffee shop halfway between my campus and his law school. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately. He looked different, not his usual polished, perfect self. His hair was messy, his clothes weren't as sharp, and he looked tired. For a second, I almost didn't recognize him. This wasn't the Liam I grew up with, the guy who always had everything together. We sat down, ordered coffee, and there was this awkward silence. Finally, he broke the ice. I'm sorry, he said, just like that. For what exactly? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. For everything, I guess, he said, looking down at his coffee. For not saying anything when you left, for not sticking up for you all these years. I don't know. I've always known how messed up it was, how they treated you, but it was easier to just go along with it. Hearing him admit that hit me hard. I didn't know what to say. I'd always assumed Liam was clueless, that he was just the golden child who never noticed how our parents treated me. But to hear him say he knew, that he chose to stay silent, that stung. So what changed? I asked. Why are you telling me this now? He sighed and ran a hand through his messy hair. I don't know, Maya. When you stood up to them, it made me realize how messed up things really are. I always knew, but I didn't want to admit it, you know. I was comfortable. I was the favorite. Why would I want to mess that up? So what do you want from me? Forgiveness? No, he said quickly. I'm not asking for that. I just wanted to talk. I wanted you to know that I get it now. And I'm quitting law school. That was the real shocker. Liam, quitting law school. The golden child, the future lawyer of the family. It didn't make sense. Wait, what? You're quitting? Since when? He looked me straight in the eye for the first time since we sat down. Yeah, I've been miserable for months. I never even wanted to be a lawyer, you know. That was all Mom and Dad's idea. I've been faking it this whole time because I didn't want to disappoint them. But seeing you leave and actually do something for yourself, it made me realize I can't keep living like this. I was speechless. This was the same guy who never wavered, who always seemed so sure of himself. To hear him admit he'd been miserable, that he was only doing what our parents wanted, it just blew my mind. So what are you going to do? I asked, still processing everything. He leaned back in his chair and smiled for the first time. I'm going to be a teacher. That's what I've always wanted to do. I just never thought it was an option, but I'm done trying to live up to their expectations. I'm applying to an education program next semester. I didn't know whether to be happy for him or angry. Part of me was still pissed that he'd stayed silent all those years, but another part of me was proud of him for finally breaking away from our parents' control. We sat there for a while, just talking about everything. He told me how hard it had been growing up with all the pressure, how he always felt like he had to be perfect. He admitted that he envied me for being able to walk away, for not caring what they thought anymore. That threw me off. I never thought Liam envied me. I always saw him as the one who had it all figured out. As we wrapped up, Liam hesitated before asking, "Do you think we could hang out more? I mean, I know I wasn't really there for you before, but I'd like to try, you know? Make things right." I didn't answer right away. It wasn't something I could just say yes to without thinking. But after everything he'd told me, after seeing this side of him I never knew existed, I figured maybe it was worth giving it a shot. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think we can try." He smiled, and for the first time in years, it felt like we were actually on the same page. It wasn't perfect, and I still had a lot of anger and resentment to work through, but it was a start. As I walked back to my dorm that day, I couldn't help but feel a weird mix of emotions. I was still pissed at my parents, still trying to figure out my next steps, but at least I wasn't alone in it anymore. For once, Liam and I were in the same boat, both trying to figure out who we were outside of our parents' expectations. It wasn't the resolution I expected, but it was something, and for now, that was enough.